So, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on digital transformation and AI in healthcare. This is the first of 5 webinars that we're running this week as part of BSI Healthcare Week. My name's Rob Turpin, and I'm Head of Sector for Healthcare Standards at BSI. Now, digital health and AI are key areas for standardization, and we've spent plenty of time over the last 10 plus years focusing on how we can support safe and effective deployment of these in the healthcare system. And I'm delighted today to be joined by 3 speakers who have all been involved in digital health standardization work in recent times and will be providing their perspectives on how digital and AI solutions are transforming healthcare in different ways. I'll introduce them properly in a moment, but first of all, I wanted to cover some housekeeping aspects. So first of all, this is a listen-only webinar. Your microphones and cameras will be disabled for the duration. However, we're happy to receive questions, so please submit any questions using the button on the screen, and they will be addressed after the presentations. For any technical issues, please report using the same question button. And after the event, we will send you a post-event feedback survey, and we'll provide a link to that in the recording. This is a CPD accredited webinar, so if you want to request your certificate, please complete the survey and we'll send that over to you. And finally, BSI hosts various events throughout the year, and to learn more about these, please scan the QR code at the bottom right-hand side of your screen at the moment. Great, so that's the housekeeping piece out of the way. And what I'd like to do now is introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Surbhi Gupta. Surbhi is a Senior Regulatory and Quality Lead in NHS England's Transformation Directorate, and she'll be talking about opportunities and challenges for digital and AI adoption in the NHS. Now, Surbhi has a wealth of experience in market access and regulatory affairs within the healthcare technology sector. She leads a dedicated team focused on ensuring all software as a medical device products are developed and maintained with high standards. And her current portfolio consists of some high impact products, such as those underpinning National 999 and 111 services. She's also an advisor to the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England's joint AI team, which leads on AI strategy, policy and safe adoption of AI technologies across the NHS ecosystem. And prior to her role in NHS England, Dr. Gupta played pivotal roles in several medtech startups where she led clinical and regulatory safety teams. So that's an introduction to Surbhi, and Surbhi, over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks very much for the kind introduction. So hello, everyone. I don't have any slides for today, but in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll talk about some of the key projects that we are undertaking here at NHS England to promote responsible and safe adoption of AI and digital products within the NHS. So I'm sure many of you know about the government's 3 key priorities for the NHS. So the move from analog to digital, the move from hospital to community, and from cure to prevention. And digital and AI products will play pivotal roles in all 3 key priority areas. So therefore, it's really important for us to support the ecosystem in a manner that allows responsible adoption and safe adoption for these AI and digital technologies. And from regulatory perspective, I'm a person with a regulatory background, so I'm really interested in understanding how, from a regulatory perspective, we can enhance these kind of technologies adoption within the NHS. And if we look at international landscape at the moment, I think UK has a unique opportunity here. So in the US, there's a lot of instability at the moment. In the EU, with the EU MDR and the EU AI Act, things are looking a bit more strict for the innovators. So UK has now, in this scenario, can position itself as a key opinion leader and as a place where innovators can come and innovate and produce these technologies and be deployed within the NHS. And I get asked a lot about how to balance innovation and regulation. And sometimes people look at this as two opposing factors, that if we have more regulation, it somehow tampers innovation. And my response to that always is that appropriate level of regulation is the key to allow scalable adoption of technology within the NHS. With appropriate level of regulation, we build safe technologies. When we build safe technologies, we build trust in a technology. And only when a technology is trusted can it be it can be adopted safely in a scalable manner. And therefore, innovation and regulation go hand in hand. And that's a really important concept to understand. So from NHS England's point of view as the centre team, what are we doing to enable the ecosystem adopt these technologies in a safe manner? So what our team, the AI team and the regulatory team, what we try to do is provide clear guidance to the system to demystify the regulatory landscape for the system, both for adopters and the developers of these technologies. And a recent example, some of you may have seen that guidance, was on how to effectively and safely deploy ambient scribes within the system. Now this is a technology that we know a lot of GP surgery, secondary trusts, mental health providers are currently using. And a lot of people were coming to us not purely understanding, is it safe for me to use it? Where is the data going? How can we deploy this effectively? And therefore, from the center, we put in a lot of effort and work in producing this guidance. The guidance would now be followed up by providing more tools and resources, again, to help the system deploy these technologies better. And this is just one example. So our team is now horizon scanning for which other AI technologies are going to be utilized, which are the next big things in the system, and what are the other things we should be providing clear guidance to the system on. So for example, AI in clinical triage is another one that the team is working on, or autonomous reporting by AI, reporting normals, for example, is another one that the team is working on. So these projects are quite complex, where we have to interact with a number of stakeholders and bring the right opinion in and then publish these guidances. So that's one way in which we help the system. And we will share the links to these guidance documents after the seminar today. Another project where NHS England and Department of Health are working together with other regulators, so MHRA, CQC, NICE, and HRA. It's a multi-agency collaboration, and we are putting together an AI and digital regulation service. So it's like a platform where we, again, provide clear language, clear content, and clear guidance for developers and adopters, and enabling them, helping them, kind of holding their hands in developing their products and deploying their products in a safe manner. So this is a service. It's a platform providing content from all the different regulators in a trusted manner. So again, if you've not seen this platform, I would highly encourage you to go on the platform, and hopefully this will help in your journey. No matter which part of the journey you're on, you should be able to find some helpful resources and signposting on this platform. And the last thing that I wanted to mention was the overlap sometimes that exists within the NHS standards and the medical device regulatory requirements. So as Rob mentioned, this is a piece of work we are doing in the background to standardize some of those things. So the DCB standards, if some of you are aware of those, are the clinical risk management standards, which are mandated for NHS deployment. And some of those sometimes overlap with our 14971 standard, for example, of medical device risk management. So there is a public consultation that's going on the DCB standards to understand from the system again, is this a duplication? Is this something we want to work around? Or is this a gap that's actually needed by the system? So so there is a delta that exists between the DCB standards and the MDR requirements, and that's important for maintaining clinical safety. So again, really trying to understand from the user group whether the requirements on the DCB standards are necessary if your product, if the product you're trying to deploy is a registered medical device. So again, if you're interested, then please go through the web page where we're talking about how we are doing the public consultation and take part in this public consultation. So over the next couple of months, the plan is to undergo a public consultation process and do a review and provide some changes on the DCP standards. So I think that's where I'll stop now. And yeah, I think we'll take some questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Surbhi. Great to hear that introduction from you. We're going to move on to our next speaker now, who is Danny Reuter, and he's going to be speaking about validation of AI in cancer care. So Danny is the AI clinical lead at the Guy's Cancer Academy, Guy's Cancer Centre, sorry. And I was first introduced to him probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, when we were first starting to look at this space as a standards body. And Danny really challenged my thinking on where we should be heading in this space. So I've got a lot to thank him for in terms of how our work has turned out in this space. He's also the co-founder and clinical AI lead for Pharos AI, and he's a public health consultant for NHS Grampian. Danny currently leads on several AI clinical evaluations in cancer care, including evaluations for clinical decision support, clinical trials matching, and histopathology diagnosis. Previously, he held posts as Director of Public Health for the London Borough of Lewisham and the City of Newcastle, and he's also a Senior Lecturer in Epidemiology and Health Services Research at both Newcastle University and Dundee University. So, Danny, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. I haven't got any slides either, and I thought what might be helpful would be if I just gave my personal AI journey and the journey that Guy's has been taking. I think that might be of great interest. My personal journey really started around about 2014, 2015, when I started learning about IBM Watson and how it beat the humans at Jeopardy, the American quiz game. I managed to get a lot of interest from King's Health Partners, which is Guy's and St Thomas's, King's College Hospital in King's College London, in seeing if we could bring IBM Watson to King's Health Partners. They wanted to charge us an enormous amount of money. There was no evidence really for its effectiveness for the product that they were offering us. So we basically said no. And then they came back around about 2017. And they hadn't really sold anything in the European market. And they asked us if we would do an evaluation with them. And at that time, I was still Director of Public Health. And we started an evaluation of one of their products called Watson for Oncology, which is a salutary tale, really, in marketing hype in AI. That evaluation went on for a couple of years. And then in 2019, I took early retirement from my public health career, and the then chief of cancer at the Guy's Cancer Centre, who was involved in the evaluation with Watson, he said to me, he said, "Danny, I'm getting approached every week by these AI companies, and they're dangling this kind of sexy tech in front of me and promising the earth, and there's no evidence base for any of it." He said, we need to set up some kind of capacity within the Guy's Cancer Centre to evaluate AI. So I came on board as the AI clinical lead at the Cancer Centre, and I think at that time I was the first person in the NHS to have that title within a hospital. There are quite a few around now, and so we began to clinically evaluate AI technology that we were horizon scanning, that looked promising. And we did that initially through a combination of grants. We got a grant from the first round of the NHSX, as it was then, AI Awards. But we also started charging companies commercial companies to clinically evaluate their products. And we started a number of products. As Rob said, we started evaluating old-fashioned expert systems, there's rules-based programmable systems, and machine learning systems, including clinical trials matching and histopathology diagnosis, amongst others. At that time, there was no national or even international consensus really on what good looks like, on a validation framework. So what I did was took kind of what I could find from organisations like NICE, Alan Turing Institute, and other places, and pulled together a draft framework so that we could use that, ask ourselves a set of questions, criteria that we could assess the AI against. At every stage of the product development lifecycle, from inception through to early development, then clinical validation, and then deployment. That framework eventually, through working with Rob, morphed into what is now the BS 30440 standards for AI in healthcare. So that work continued, but I was really literally just one man and no dog, just working on my own within the cancer centre. But in parallel, Guy's and St Thomas's, the Foundation Trust, of which Guy's Cancer Centre is only a part, set up through Harish Swibe, I think it was the first medical AI team within an NHS hospital called the Clinical Scientific Computing Centre. And that team, which began around 2021, 2022, now has over 20 people in it. It has evaluated and implemented, not all, but many of over 50 AI projects, AI products. And the CSC was set up really to overcome three key barriers really to AI adoption and deployment within the NHS. One was a lack of people and skills, and so within that team there are AI scientists and clinicians who collaborate with the scientists, and we've set up AI clinical fellowships as well for medical and non-medical staff in training, and that's now become a national fellowship program. The CSC also started to develop its own policies and frameworks for procurement and deployment, and that turned into a quality management system which they had to develop from scratch because there wasn't really anything around for AI, certainly not in the NHS. And then they also, through working with the Academic AI Centre in the university, developed a platform for the deployment of AI, which became the AI Deployment Engine, or AID for short. And then I guess I'll probably stop there, but just reflect on what I think are some of the key messages from that experience, from having gone through that journey. I think the number one key message for me really is that AI is moving way too fast for traditional evidence-based paradigms. We're now at the stage where we're at the start of a Cambrian explosion in the evolution of medical care, the likes of which we've never ever seen before in human recorded history, really. And medicine, through AI and robotics, and through the omics, our ability to engineer biology, and through the adoption of system science and the application of system science to healthcare, is now moving so fast that medical interventions are evolving in weeks and months, not years and decades. And our traditional evidence-based paradigm for evaluating and validating medical interventions, through randomized controlled trials and then systematic reviews and meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, from the first trial to routine clinical deployment, takes 10 years, really, 5 to 10 years. And we're going to have to change our paradigm for evidence, for the effectiveness and cost effectiveness and safety, but particularly cost effectiveness and clinical effectiveness of AI in healthcare if we're going to, well, certainly if the NHS is going to keep up with the rest of the world. And the other message really is that some of the key barriers really, particularly if you're at a healthcare provider within the NHS, including primary care, is governance, information governance, data governance, and IT. There's a huge amount, as anyone who works in the NHS knows, a huge amount of risk aversion, particularly around governance and around adopting IT and deploying IT systems within the NHS. I think I'll stop there, and I'm sure we'll have some interesting questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Danny. And it's always good to hear the backstories of how people get involved in standardization. Often we just see the start of a project and then we see it, complete. But actually, the entry into that and how people get involved in it is always a really interesting thing to hear. So thank you very much for that. We're going to move on to our final presenter now, Frankie Edelman. So she's Digital Mental Health Manager at the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. Frankie's worked at MHRA for over 8 years. She has worked in various medical device areas, but is currently working on a 3-year Wellcome funded project aimed to clarify the regulation and evaluation of digital mental health technologies, which will drive access to high quality, effective and acceptably safe solutions. Frankie's got a biomedical science degree with a specialism in neurobiology of the brain, and she's also completed training in yoga and psychotherapy. And she's also worked as an editor for medical journals and worked in a data analysis role for Public Health England. So, Frankie, thank you for joining, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Rob, and really, really good to be here. So, I thought I'd give an overview of the project that I'm working on and then how that fits in with us working with BSI. So first, it might be helpful to place where my role is. So I work in the software as a medical device team within the MHRA, and similarly to the other speakers, in the last sort of 5 years, we've gone from a couple of members of this team to now sort of about 8 or 10 of us here at this team. So it's really is an expanding area that we're looking at, and that's looking at all software as a medical device. My particular role is currently funded by Wellcome, myself and one other colleague at the MHRA and one colleague at NICE. And we're focusing specifically on clarifying the regulation for digital mental health technologies and how they are regulated as software as a medical device. So it's a 3-year project, and it started in May. So we've May 2023. So we've just got 1 year left at the moment. As I mentioned, the project we're working closely. MHRA and NICE are working closely together, but we've also got the chance to really engage with a wide range of stakeholders. And vitally, we're including people with lived and living experience of mental health challenges. The overall goal is to improve access to safe and effective digital mental health technologies to improve mental health outcomes. So this slide here is just going through some of the project stakeholders that we've engaged with. So we have a working group and a project board. On our working group, it consists of NHS England, digital mental health policy, also clinical expertise from psychiatry, clinical psychologists, psychiatric nurses, GPs, and so forth, with various different specialities in mental health. We have representatives as a GP and also digital mental health researchers, and representatives from the Health Innovation Network as well. So we've really tried to have a diverse representation here and work really closely with them with all of our outputs. We've also had separate engagement pieces for healthcare professionals and researchers, approved bodies, patients in the public health industry, and other organisations as part of the health ecosystem. So this slide, I seem to be moving the slides 2 at a time there, apologies. So this slide here is just giving a bit of an overview of some of the outputs of the project. So we've structured it in a way to follow the life cycle approach of a product. And we've got outputs focusing on the intended purpose, the qualification as software as a medical device, the regulatory classification, and then looking at clinical evidence generation, both from an MHRA regulatory point of view, but also from a NICE point of view as well, and then looking at post-market surveillance and adverse events. And then lastly, our last work package is focusing on how to support healthcare professionals, patients and the public in choosing good quality products. So this slide here is just to go through some of the main outputs we've had so far. So if you're interested, I really recommend going onto our project webpage, which will show all of these outputs, and you'll be able to find the links. So on this webpage, you can see a user and public perspectives report that we published, which was around what members of the public and patients perceive as how they perceive these products and what they'd expect from a regulatory point of view. Then the next 3 bullet points on this slide are published journal articles that we have, which talks about the project as a whole, some of the challenges and what we're hoping to do. And the next bullet point here is one of our key outputs so far, which has been MHRA guidance on digital mental health technologies, and it's describes how to characterize your product, so how to explain what it's intended for and how it does that, so its functionality. And then really significantly, we give a lot of detail about how to determine whether a digital mental health technology qualifies as software as a medical device, and if it does, the classification. The next couple of bullet points here are we've had a AI in mental health event here where we brought together vast number of different stakeholders, and we're currently writing that up into an article as well. You'll see on our webpage we also have project newsletters, which I recommend signing up to if you'd be interested in learning more about the project and then finding out whether there's any points where you can collaborate and input into thoughts and proposals. And we've also already done a lot of presentations at different conferences to start disseminating this information to different people, maybe some who are not even aware of the medical device regulations, to really help bring up the awareness of the regulations and how that applies for mental health. And then the last bullet point here is just speaking to the vast amount of work that we do, which is answering regulatory inquiries related to digital mental health technologies and any post-market surveillance adverse events. And what came out of the MHRA guidance is that we've had a couple of compliance cases, and so now have 3 or 4 field safety notices related to digital mental health technologies and their qualification. And so this slide here now just talks to some of the outputs that we've got in progress. The first one is the significant one that we're in collaboration with BSI at the moment about. So it's at the initial stages, but we are planning to develop a BSI standard for the clinical evaluation for digital mental health technologies. I'll speak a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides, but just to go through some of the other outputs that might be of interest. Our NICE colleagues have done a really interesting piece about researching different quality of life measures and how appropriate they are for mental health. So for those of you may already know that NICE have a preferred measure, which is EQ5D, but there are a number of other quality of life measures which can be used for mental health, and they've done a comparison of that. There will also be an article, a research article, which is published on this. From an MHRA point of view, we will be publishing some more MHRA guidance specifically on post-market surveillance for digital mental health technologies. We also hope to do some yellow card scheme improvements. So for those of you who don't know, the yellow card scheme is a way for healthcare professionals and patients and the public to be able to report any adverse events, be that with a medicine or a medical device, or of course software as a medical device and digital mental health technologies. We've also got planned to be doing a report on significant change and predetermined change control plans for digital mental health technologies. These are very specific regulatory terms, and maybe we'll get some questions about that in the panel. I won't go into any more detail now, though, about those. And then the last couple of bullet points are speaking to us trying to disseminate some of this regulatory information to clinicians in particular here. So we have worked with NHS learning platforms to develop tip sheets to be able to explain the regulation of digital mental health technologies, to be able to help those who are potentially choosing products for patients. And similarly, we've got planned to be collaborating with the Royal College of Psychiatry with developing some training for psychiatrists in their postgraduate diploma on data and digital. And then, as I mentioned before, we've still got some outputs for different dissemination of information at different conferences. So the last two slides are just to go into a little bit more detail about the BSI standard. So we're really excited to be working with BSI on this piece. One of the main reasons why we felt that it was more appropriate for it to be a BSI standard rather than MHRA guidance is because this particular point of clinical evaluation is something that all of many regulators across the world are interested in and keen to sort of input into. So the hope is that we'll have this first standard, which is intended to be very much a best practice considerations piece around evidence generation and clinical evaluation for digital mental health technologies. But the hope is that actually if there's enough consensus internationally that we may be able to later down the line take this to ISO and potentially create a standard for worldwide, and it'd be useful for harmonization on an international perspective. So in terms of where we're at, we're very much at the early stages of this piece of work. So it will hopefully be officially starting in July, and we've got an agreed technical author for the piece, and we'll be sort of firming up the steering group in the next few weeks. BSI have informed us that because it's a PAS standard, it will take 12 to 18 months to develop. And importantly, there'll be a 1-month public consultation, and this will be around spring 2026. So already starting to mention this line that if you'd be interested in hearing about when this public consultation starts, please do contact Nisha at the email address on this slide here. And then she'll be able to update you when it goes live and you can comment. And for us, the more input we have, hopefully the more it will mean that the more beneficial this standard would be. So we'd be really keen to hear from as many people who would like to. And then I think this is my last slide, but just to give a sort of an overview as to what we're hoping to cover in this standard. So we'll be hoping to cover sort of study designs for evidencing safety and effectiveness. What would be considered state of the art for different types of products in this field, what would be considered benchmarks, what are appropriate and good quality comparators. Also, we hope to cover appropriate populations and how that changes depending on the product. Of course, sample size, statistical analysis, completeness of data. Very importantly, the appropriateness and relevance of different research questions and primary and secondary output measures. How to use appropriate patient-reported outcome measures, adequate follow-up periods, and then identifying, monitoring and reporting adverse events, controls for bias, real-world evidence, and then lastly, data appraisal and evaluation. Yes, so I think that's my last slide there. So thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the panel and some hopefully good questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Frankie. And we're going to have a Q&A session now, and I'd like to invite the other speakers to put their cameras back on. So as mentioned earlier, please use the online button to submit questions. We've already got some coming in. We had some coming in advance of the meeting as well, so I will aim to get through as many of these as possible in the remaining 20-25 minutes or so. And apologies if I don't get to all of your questions. What I may try and do is group some of these together so we maybe can answer sort of 2 or 3 questions at a time. So first of all, I'd probably like to start with a piece around coordination. So Surabhi, you mentioned the word demystifying, which I thought was great, and it's probably something we need to really focus on in this space, and certainly a word that I've used in the past when we've been talking about how do we align the typical BSI standards that are used by industry with what NHS is looking at. So maybe I'll start with you. I think how are NHS and regulatory bodies and other healthcare bodies coordinating to streamline requirements and provide clear guidance to innovators? Do you think we're on the right path at the moment, or is there a lot more to be done? I'd be interested in getting your take on that.
There is definitely a lot more to be done, Rob, for sure. But the ADIS platform that I mentioned, this started as a multi-agency collaboration. So MHRA, NICE, CQC, HRA, and of course NHSE and DHSE, we are all partners in this collaboration. And I think these are the kind of collaborations we need. So, this group meets frequently, there's a governance board, steering board, and we agree together what are the kind of guidance and clarity that the system needs, what we should be publishing. But these kind of collaborations are not the regulator's BAU. And because of resource constraints, these are the things that firstly becomes kind of down your priority list, right? Because there are more urgent matters that these regulators have to address, and therefore all this good work around collaboration and alignment with other agencies sometimes is not in their priority list. So this is the challenge that we face. How can we ensure continued funding for these kind of multi-agency collaborations? And that's the way forward in my view, but we can definitely do more of that.
Brilliant, thank you. And Danny, similar question. So I remember when we first started talking about artificial intelligence, one of the things you pointed out to me was the technology is becoming so complex now that there isn't one single person that understands fully how it works and how it's going to be deployed. And then you need to have, therefore you need to have a multidisciplinary team in order to deploy it. So again, have we got that right at the moment? Is there more that needs to evolve in that space? Interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from personal experience, from the experience of working at Guy's and St Thomas's, and we are still at a very, very early stage, aren't we? We're at the dawn of this revolution, but it feels like, certainly in the last sort of 5 or 6 years since I've been in this post, um, there's been a very rapid kind of increase in understanding and appreciation in the number of clinicians that are getting engaged in AI projects, who are actually innovating their own AI. It's not necessarily as programmers, but as clinicians who are coming with an idea, a really good idea, identifying a clinical need, and then taking it to a group of people who can then develop the AI. And I know, a large teaching hospital like Guy's at St Thomas's is better equipped to do that kind of thing. But I think there are smaller trusts as well that have got AI clinical leads in place, who are often clinicians who are starting to, if they're not developing their own AI, they're certainly getting the kind of policies and frameworks in place to evaluate it. But there's a massive educational challenge, I think, amongst healthcare professionals. And one of the things we've done at Guy's, so Guy's has a cancer academy, and we developed the first AI in cancer course for the academy, which launched in October last year. So we're on to our second cohort, and the response has been, really, really positive. We've had lots of oncologists, surgeons, radiologists, nurses, and some NHS managers as well registering on the course. So I think the answer is, we're at a very early stage. There's a hell of a long way to go to get a workforce that's prepared to actually work with AI, work alongside AI. But I think we're just about to kind of go exponential, I think. That would be my take.
Brilliant. That's good to hear, and exciting times. Frankie, I mean, similar question for you in the context of the project you're running, but also the piece I'm interested in is the devolved nature of UK healthcare. Obviously, MHRA, like BSI, is a UK-wide organisation, so we're focused on the entire UK. That can often provide challenges. How do you undertake those approaches, in terms of aligning all of the UK and not just one part of it?
It's a good question, and it is quite a complicated regulatory landscape at the moment. So you're right. So the MHRA is the competent authority for the UK for regulation of medical devices. But since Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol, the regulations are somewhat different for Great Britain in comparison to Northern Ireland. However, we really do ensure that any guidance we put out there or any information for regulation, we cover both what's expected from a Great Britain perspective and what's required from a Northern Ireland perspective. This is particularly important for software and apps, because if you have put your app on the app stores, the main ones such as Apple and Google still categorize for UK. So if you put your product on the app stores, you both need to be compliant with Great Britain and Northern Ireland regulations. So there's something extra to sort of think about from a software perspective.
Brilliant, thank you. Going to move on a bit more towards market access now. We've had a few questions in that are essentially asking the same thing. So, what is the biggest barrier to digital health or AI adoption? But also, what strategies are effective in overcoming that resistance to change, whether it's amongst patients or staff? And maybe I'll start with you, Surbhi, with this one.
Yeah. No, this is an interesting one. And a lot of people, as I was saying, perceive regulation is as a biggest barrier. And I actually disagree. I think one of the biggest barrier is change management, because humans are in general resistant to change, So the moment you are introducing a new AI technology, the clinician, the patient, the entire system is a bit wary of change, is what I think is the real barrier, and managing that change effectively is the only way to go forward. Providing an actual benefit use case for why adopting this technology is actually better for you as an individual, we see is lacking many times. Some products that come to my desk will look like a great tech, on paper it's solving a lot of problems, but where in the clinical pathway it fits and how seamlessly it fits, and it can only be successful if you don't have to think about using it. So I think that's what is the biggest barrier when technologies are being developed, because it's a cool tech and not because it was a real clinical need and it fits the clinical pathway in a seamless way. When that happens, then adoption becomes easier. So in my view, the biggest challenge is the mindset and not fitting the technology in the right clinical pathway. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, Danny, similar question. So obviously you're probably more focused on the AI aspects, but what do you see the most significant challenge to be, and what are the strategies to overcome that?
Yeah, no, I agree completely with Surbhi. I think she's hit the nail on the head, really. That I think of it in terms of kind of macro barriers, meso barriers, and micro barriers. And at the kind of macro level, as Surbhi said, there's the culture within the NHS, and within medicine really across the world, but particularly in the NHS, there's a culture of inertia and resistance to change, which um, is very, very difficult to shift. And it doesn't just apply to AI; it applies to any innovation. It's the reason why we've had, endless government recommendations for transformation of the NHS to move from, hospital to community, to integrate primary and secondary care. The list is endless, and we still haven't managed to achieve any of those big transformational shifts. And a lot of it, I think, is to do with the culture. At the macro level, also, are the financial disincentives, the way in which the NHS is financially incentivized, and the short-termism in terms of annual budgets means that, and the fact that we're broke means that it's very, very difficult to reallocate resources and to invest in new technology, particularly AI. When you move to the kind of the meso and the micro level, then you are back to governance issues, information governance. I don't know if anyone's tried to get a DPIA approved for anything really in the NHS recently. Just to get a new app put in for a smoking cessation app, for your health authority area, it can take up to a year just to get a DPIA approved. And then there's our IT departments are geared up to be risk averse really, and they're geared up for safety and security, which means it's very, very difficult to get anything rolled out, and they're under resourced. I mean, most IT departments are very, very under resourced, which means that you go on a big long waiting list for deployment of any new piece of kit, particularly if it's an AI product, by which time the world's moved on. So yeah, those are just some of them. There's no one barrier that they have a kind of a cumulative effect, I think. But I feel like there's a wind of change coming though at all of those levels.
Thank you. Frankie, obviously you have one eye on the UK, but you're also doing a lot of work with other regulators at an international level. Would you like to sort of cover a bit about market access of digital health products at that sort of level?
Yeah, definitely. So the main thing to mention is that MHRA is part of IMDRF, which is the International Medical Devices Regulators Forum. And the main sort of aim for this is most of the international regulators in the world come together. We're sharing learnings, and the goal is to reach sort of harmonization as much as possible and as much as what would be useful and helpful. So the MHRA input into this, and there are various guidance documents which are also published at an IMDRF level, and then various different regulators will then potentially translate that into, so for example, MHRA will then put out UK guidance for that. So we're involved in that. And then as part of the actual, specifically the Digital Mental Health Technology Project, we've also been using that framework to speak to the same regulators, with the same idea being that as much as you can harmonise regulations is useful for industry who are trying to go on the market in more than one jurisdiction. It means there's less duplication, both from the industry perspective, but also from the regulatory perspective. And then also, importantly, if there is a safety issue that does come up, that we can talk to different parts of the world to try and understand the problem better and have a consistent approach to that problem as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I want to move on now to talk a bit more about workforce and training in the healthcare system. And this is just a general question. So how do we address the digital skills gap amongst NHS or healthcare staff? And also, how is training being integrated into the rollout of new digital solutions? Surbhi, would you like to tackle that one first?
I'll try. So this is, of course, a very important aspect, right? Like giving a new tool to our already overworked clinical team is hugely demanding on their time, when they are struggling to just keep up with the work, with the waiting list and whatnot, and then you bring there is a new fancy electronic health record system, why don't you try using it? It is really difficult when it's done without appropriate training. So training the individual to use it is the most important key, in my opinion. And what we are seeing at the moment is the suppliers who are providing these new cool tech, they would come, implement, and then they disappear, and then they're nowhere to be found, So this constant training is completely lacking. And that is not sometimes factored into the funding of this new tech, So ensuring that the supplier is bound to provide continuous training is really important, especially for AI, when the clinicians do not understand there isn't enough transparency and explainability on the product, then it becomes even more important that the clinicians understand how to use it effectively and safely. Otherwise, it just becomes another toy that's sitting in the shelf and people are not using it, So we have invested a lot of money in procuring this product, but then none of our clinicians want to use it because they don't feel confident in using it. So, of course, these are big problems, but how do we address and solve these problems from an HSE point of view, from the center? What we are trying to do is, as I said before, is come up with guidance and more kind of hand-holding, more templates and more tools to help you deploy these technologies. But the training piece, the education and training piece, is a shared responsibility with the suppliers and the deploying organization and the center. So I don't have one solution, Rob, but I think this is a very important area to consider for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I think that shared aspect is really, really important. It isn't just down to one single body or organisation to do this. It involves everybody coming together. Danny, do you want to give your views on this?
Just to say again, I think Serbi's hit the nail on the head, really. Um, but I wonder, trying to sort of think ahead, um, I think we need our medical schools to do a lot more. Um, I was I was teaching at the Guys Kings at St Thomas's just the other week, and got a show of hands of how many of the students across all 5 years had much teaching in AI. And there's very little on the medical undergraduate curriculum in most medical schools. I think I might be wrong, um, um, and so I think we're going to have to try and sort of think ahead to the next generation of health professionals, not just medical, but non-medical as well. Um, and I think that's probably a good place to start. And Health Education England as well. So there are AI clinical fellowships now for doctors in training and nurses in training as well. But it's incredibly competitive. There are very few places available, and it should be the norm. It should be the norm for all doctors in training to have an attachment or to go have some kind of program built into their training program that teaches them not how to program, but how to work with AI, how to recognize what good looks like, how to be able to ask the right questions around validation, and how to work with it, and how to recognize what the limitations of it are. Yeah, so a lot of that probably needs to be done nationally.
Yeah, thank you. And Frankie, I know you mentioned pieces in your work, your digital mental health technology work around workforce and training. Would you like to elaborate on those a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. So I agree with everything that's already been said. I guess the bit that we have been focusing in is trying to provide training to healthcare professionals and patients in the public specifically about the regulation of these types of products. With the idea being that currently, I think whether there's a CE mark or a UKCA mark on a software product maybe wouldn't actually symbolize much to those who are trying to choose products, because there is such a lack of awareness of what that might mean. And especially even if they know what the UKCA mark or CE mark means, but maybe there's a lack of awareness of what it means if there's a class 1 or a 2A. The fact that class 1s would be self-certified and 2A and above would have had an approved body or a notified body. So that's why our last work package is trying to focus on that in particular, also because a lot of the outputs that we do at the MHRA are specific to industry. So we're trying to translate that information to both healthcare professionals, patients, and the public. And yeah, we've got a few things in the pipeline at the moment. I think, as I mentioned, so we've worked with NHS Learning Platform and MindEd, and we're creating what's called tip sheets about regulation they're specifically for digital mental health technologies because of the project, but they actually will be transferable and useful for all digital products. And then, as I mentioned, also we're got in the pipeline to collaborate with Royal College of Psychiatrists as well, who are in the midst of developing a postgraduate diploma on data and digital. And so the hope is to have a regulatory module within that as well. And we've done some other market research for patients and the public. So we've also got some thinking about how we could sort of help those as well, focusing on education about regulation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We've probably got time for one more question. And this is the forward thinking piece. So if we were going to come back together in 5 years' time, what would have needed to have happened in order for the digital transformation in the NHS to take place? So, what are the key priorities for digital health deployment over the next 5 years? And maybe I'll start with you first, Serbi.
More funding is something I would want to say, but I don't know where that funding is coming from. So I think, more funding is one for sure in the next 5 years, because next 5 years is still a short term. It's not a long term view. I think it's still a short term view, and a bit more strategy. So I think what we are lacking right now. So there are spurts of activity. So that is something like GSTT, are quite advanced, and they are actually deploying some products very successfully. But then there are other pockets in the country where there is absolutely no digital transformation. So I think to have a little bit of a national level strategy would help the system in deploying and understanding and go through the transformation journey. So I think that is definitely needed, more directed efforts.
I think that's a really interesting point, because when we look at our the BSI user base for standards, particularly in the NHS, so we do, we provide a lot of standards to industry. When we look at the NHS, it is heavily orientated towards the research institutions, the teaching hospitals, university hospitals, and so on. And one of the things we've tried to do in the last year, particularly in the artificial intelligence space, is get closer to the 90% of hospitals that don't fit into that category, and with some success so far. But I agree, it feels like something that needs to be done at a national level. Danny, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think in terms of funding, I think if there could be ring-fenced funding, that might help. Whatever funding there is available, if some of it could be new funding for the NHS, if some of it could be ring-fenced so they could only be used for digital innovation, I think that might be helpful. And I think in terms of unblocking the governance barriers, I think if the Department of Health and Social Care could actually make some policy interventions that just make it much easier for reduce the level of risk aversion in terms of data governance and information governance, so that it kind of provides some air cover for IG officers to feel a little bit more emboldened in letting stuff through quickly. I think that might go a good way. And one of the things that the CSC at Guy's did, and the guy who set that up, Harris Schweib, has now left to found his own startup called Newton's Tree. And what they're doing, they're developing a deployment solution, a deployment engine, so that you as a hospital, you buy this deployment solution once, and then it has all the AI on it, which has already been governance approved, so that anything that's on the platform is ready to go straight into the hospital, so that the hospital doesn't have to get IG approved for every single AI product that's on the platform, on the AI deployment platform. And I think if that could be funded and scaled up and rolled out across the NHS, that kind of AI deployment solution, I think that could very rapidly accelerate the rate of AI adoption certainly in secondary care. I'm not sure how that would work in primary care, but certainly in secondary care.
Brilliant. Frankie, final word to you.
Oh gosh, I hope I can do a good final word. The first one, I'd have to say, just from our perspective, we're very aware of what our role is, and the number one would be is trying to increase awareness, education, and clarity around the regulatory aspects and what is required, and that's to all stakeholders throughout the ecosystem. And then the other ideas are ones that have already been touched upon. The collaboration aspect. So totally agreed with what Surbhi said earlier about there's a couple of projects that we've got that do show how we can do it well, but we really need to see that sort of in business as usual a lot more. And then, as both have commented on, this financial aspect as well. So even if everything else is perfectly clear and we collaborate perfectly, without that piece in the puzzle there, I don't think we'll be able to actually realise the benefit that we can do from digital health.
Brilliant. And with that, we're out of time. which is amazing. We could have carried on this conversation all afternoon, but I'd like to thank our panelists for their presentations and answering questions today. Apologies we didn't get through all the questions. Just my closing remarks, digital transformation is obviously here and it's happening, and it seems to be growing exponentially. It's been great to hear about the different and diverse ways that it's being applied across the healthcare system. And it's also really positive to see how standards are helping to support regulation, market access, training, and the general future direction of medical software. So just before we close, just some dates to your diary. So as I said at the start, this is the first of 5 webinars we have this week. They're all between 12 and 1. So we've got one looking at sustainability tomorrow, the phase out of PFAS materials. We've got a general regulatory update on Wednesday, circular economy and healthcare on Thursday, and then we've got one on in silico testing. There's a big government project going on at the moment involving MHRA, in fact, relating to in silico trials. So keen to hear on about all of those. You'll be able to access those through the same link you came to here. You'll be able to register for those events separately. And I think there's just one final slide that's got the links to some of the standards and information that we spoke about during this event. So thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much for everybody who's attended and participated in this webinar. It's been really, really good, really insightful for me. Please fill out the feedback form, and we hope to hear from you all again soon. Thank you.